Okay, I want you to close your eyes for a second. Imagine you're standing right in the middle of Times Square, or maybe the financial district of a major city. You see the skyscrapers, the stock ticker scrolling by, people rushing around in suits, all that concrete, all that steel. It feels solid, right? It feels permanent.
It feels like the only game in town.
Exactly. The only game in town. Now imagine someone is standing right next to you and they look at all of that, the billion-dollar buildings, the legal contracts, the entire infrastructure of modern life, and they see it as, well, as vapor,
Hmm.
a temporary illusion. And not only that, they see it as something that needs to be superseded.
You're starting us off with a pretty heavy metaphysical curveball today. I mean, that sounds like we're about to discuss a sci-fi novel. Or maybe a manifesto from a hermit living up in a cave somewhere.
You would think. You really would. But we are not. We are talking about a concept, a very specific concept called the evolutionary. And the man behind this concept, he isn't a hermit. He's not a sci-fi writer. He is a man who spent his entire life in the absolute center of that solid world we just described. We are talking about Manuel del Valle y Colón.
And this is where the story gets so incredibly textured. Because Manuel isn't just an observer. He was a distinguished attorney, a judge, an Ivy League scholar. I mean, he walked the halls of Yale Law School. He influenced Supreme Court justices.
Right. And yet this is the same man who wrote this massive, sprawling collection of poetry titled Omnibus Poetry 58, Evolutionaries. It's our primary source today. And in this book, he isn't writing about tort reform or, contract law. He's writing about shamans, wolf gods, ancient warriors, and I kid you not, the spiritual necessity of marrying a bowl of homemade soup.
It's a juxtaposition that, honestly, it just shouldn't work. It feels like two completely different people are inhabiting one body. But that's exactly the point of what he calls the evolutionary.
So before we dive into the biography and the poetry, we really need to define this term. Because when I first saw the title Evolutionaries, I immediately thought, okay, Darwin, biology, survival of the fittest. But that's not at all what he means, is it?
No, not in the biological sense. Not really. Based on the source text, an evolutionary is defined as someone who understands that the world purports to be fixed or permanent. They see that society says, look, this is how the law works, this is how the economy works, this is just the way things are. But the evolutionary, they realize this is an illusion.
An illusion that must be superseded to effectuate change. I'm pulling that quote directly from the text.
Precisely. It's almost like, seeing the Matrix. If you believe the rules are absolute, you can only operate within them. You can be a good lawyer, a good employee, whatever. But if you realize the rules are just temporary human constructs, then you can change them. You can evolve past them.
And our mission today is to explore how Manuel del Valle Colón did exactly that. We have a stack of sources in front of us. That is, honestly, it's kind of intimidating. We have biographical data, we have yearbook entries from the 1960s, legal CVs, personal photographs from the 70s, and then this dense, really mystical poetry collection.
And the visual component of these sources is worth noting right off the bat because it sets the entire tone. You have these archival photos of 1970s Yale, black and white, grainy, very, very serious. You see the stone arches, the heavy coats, the serious faces.
Yeah.
And then splacked right next to them in the source material, you have these vibrant, almost psychedelic paintings of indigenous warriors, shamans, with these multicolored headdresses, glowing wolves.
It's a clash of civilizations right there on the page.
And our job is to figure out how one man lived inside both of those pictures at the exact same time.
All right, let's start the man himself. Segment 1, the scholar warrior. Because, you might expect someone with this evolutionary philosophy to have been born into a commune or maybe an ashram. But Manuel's story starts in a very, very different place.
It starts in East Harlem, New York City. He was
Yeah.
born October 1948 to Puerto Rican parents. And he grew up in the projects, specifically the Carver houses and the Douglas projects.
So he's a city kid, a working class kid, but then we get to his high school years, and this is where the sources get really fun. He went to Brooklyn Tech.
Which is a legendary school. I mean, even today, it's an intellectual powerhouse. But in the mid-'60s, it must have been a crucible.
It must have. We have his yearbook entries here from 1966, and usually, yearbooks are full of generic stuff like, have a great summer, or stay cool. But the stuff that was written about Manuel it's different.
It's surprisingly prophetic, isn't it?
So prophetic. Listen to this one. A classmate calls him the power behind the throne.
I mean, that is a wild thing to say about a teenager. The power behind the throne. That implies he wasn't just the guy out front. He was the one orchestrating things, the strategist.
Exactly. And another one writes, to one of America's future historians, And then there's this guy, Richard Rosen, who calls him the king of quotes.
King of quotes. That suggests he was already speaking in a way that people remembered. He wasn't just chatting, he was holding court.
Yeah.
He was already seen as a kind of philosopher, even then.
And look at this list of extracurriculars. It's exhausting just reading it. Free World Club, Pulling Squad, Debating Society. And this is my favorite fencing manager.
The fencing manager detail is just perfect. Fencing is all about precision, right?
Yeah.
Parrying, thrusting, finding the weakness in the opponent's defense. It's physical chess. It's the perfect training ground for a trial attorney.
It really is. So you have this kid who is clearly brilliant, clearly ambitious, and he just launches from Brooklyn Tech straight into the Ivy League. He goes to Yale for a transitional year, then Wesleyan for American Studies, and he lands at Princeton.
And at Princeton, he isn't just studying, he's organizing. He founded the Latino organization for the undergraduate college. So he's already acting on that evolutionary impulse, seeing that a structure doesn't exist, in this case a Latino org, and just creating it.
But this is where the scholar part really meets the warrior part. He writes his senior thesis on Puerto Rican education. Now, usually a senior thesis gets read by, what, 2 professors, and then it gathers dust in a library basement.
Right. But Manuel's thesis was different. He had interned for Senator Jacob Javits, and his thesis ended up being used in a Civil Rights Commission hearing.
I mean, that is a massive flex for a college student.
It's more than a flex. It's impact. This work actually helped frame the complaint in a landmark case, Aspira v. Board of Education.
Okay, we need to pause here, because I think a lot of people might hear Aspira v. Board of Education and just hear a bunch of legal jargon. Can you break down what this actually was? Why does it matter so much?
This was a brawl, a huge civil rights battle. At the time, you had thousands upon thousands of Puerto Rican and Latino kids in New York City schools who didn't speak English. And the school system was essentially just warehousing them. They'd sit in class, understand nothing, learn nothing, and eventually fail.
So they were being denied an education simply because of a language barrier?
Exactly. The Aspira consent decree changed everything. It forced the Board of Education to provide bilingual education. It wasn't just a nice-to-have thing anymore. It became a legal right. And Manuel, as a young man, was providing the intellectual ammunition for that fight.
That connects directly to his whole philosophy. He saw a system, the Board of Ed, that purported to be fixed. We only teach in English. That's just how it is. I said, no, that's an illusion. We can change it.
And he did. By the time he gets to Yale Law School, class of 74, he's already a veteran of these battles.
And speaking of Yale Law, I mean, the network he enters there is just unbelievable. His classmates included Clarence Thomas and Lonnie Guinier.
It's the absolute epicenter of American legal thought. You have people who will go on to become Supreme Court justices and leading civil rights scholars all sitting in the same seminars.
But there is one connection in the source material that really stopped me in my tracks. It's a handwritten inscription.
Ah, the Sotomayor connection.
Yes. So Manuel worked with a Dr. Frank Ayala at Princeton, who then introduced him to a young Sonia Sotomayor. Years later, she writes her book, My Beloved World. And in Manuel's personal copy, she writes a note.
And you have to read it for us because the wording is so specific.
She wrote, Manuel, you were my first role model, someone with a passion for fighting for change. Thank you for all you have done for so many and for what you continue to do.
You were my first role model. That is not a small compliment. That is a foundational statement. Sonia Sotomayor is a Supreme Court justice, one of the most powerful legal minds in the country. And she is pointing to Manuel del Valle Colón and saying, I looked at you to learn how to do this.
It just establishes his credibility in a way that nothing else could. We aren't analyzing the poetry of some guy who couldn't hack it in the real world. We are analyzing the poetry of a guy who was a titan in the real world.
A titan who goes on to become the chief administrative law judge of the NY State Division of Human Rights, the first Puerto Rican to ever hold that position.
And he wasn't just, banging a gavel. He was prioritizing cases that nobody wanted to touch. Racial harassment, sexual harassment, AIDS discrimination cases in the 80s and 90s.
Which was a terrifying time for that topic. People were afraid to even be in the same room as someone with AIDS, let alone give them a fair legal hearing. Manuel stepped right into that fear and demanded justice.
So we have the picture of the man, the scholar, the judge, the warrior for justice. He wears the suit. He speaks the language of the court. But then you open this book, Evolutionaries, and you find something completely different.
You find the internal world that was fueling the external fight.
Let's move on to segment 2, deconstructing modernity. because for a guy who was so successful in the modern world, he seems to have some serious beef with it in his poetry.
Beef is putting it mildly. He launches a full-scale critique.
Mm.
There's a poem in here titled Escape that really sets the stage.
In Escape, he describes the world as burning itself asunder. He talks about a society that's propelled by stocks and crypto coinage and false heroes.
It feels very current, doesn't it? Very now.
It does. And he uses this term, the digital masters.
That one stuck out to me too, the digital masters.
Yeah.
He's critiquing the way humanity is being debased into data points.
I think we all feel that. You scroll through social media, or you look at your credit score, or you get targeted by an ad because you just mentioned pizza near your phone, and you feel like you're just this cluster of data to be harvested.
Exactly. And Manuel argues that this reduces us. It strips away the soul. He says we are being used only for testing and marketing. And his argument is that we become disconnected from our essence because we're worshiping these false idols of metrics and efficiency.
So what's the solution then? Because usually when people critique technology, they say, we need better privacy laws, or we need to break up big tech.
Manuel's solution is much more radical. He calls for a return to the heart, the spirit, and the soul. And he uses this really provocative image to illustrate this. It's the contrast between the wild boar and the suit and tie.
This image is so vivid in the text. On one side, you have a man with a wild boar head holding spears. He's primal. Dangerous, maybe. On the other side, you have the modern man with his supermarket and his infirmary.
The supermarket and the infirmary. I mean, think about what those two things represent. Convenience and safety.
Right. I don't have to hunt. I just go to Kroger. I don't have to heal myself. I go to the ER.
But the poem argues that evolution was now in need of devolution.
Evolution in need of devolution. Now, I have to play devil's advocate here for a second. Is he saying we should blow up the hospitals and the grocery stores? Is he saying we should go back to dying of infections and starving in the winter? Because that sounds terrible.
It's a totally valid question.
Yeah.
But I don't think he's arguing for a literal destruction of technology. I think he's arguing for a spiritual devolution. He says we need to return to village peace and the inner self.
So it's about what we lost in the trade-off, what we gave up.
Exactly. We gained the supermarket, but we lost the connection to our food. We gained the infirmary, but we lost the understanding of our own bodies. He writes about recovering the harmony that had once prevailed. He's saying that we're safer now, yes, but we are also more hollow.
We traded meaning for comfort.
And the evolutionary is the person who tries to get that meaning back without necessarily giving up all the comfort, or at least without being enslaved by the comfort.
This leads us right to the tools he uses to get that meaning back. The archetypes. Segment 3, the shaman and the warrior. These figures pop up all over the poetry.
They do. Let's look at the shaman first. In the text, the shaman is described with multicolored headdresses and seashells. But the most interesting part is what the shaman does.
He communicates with plants.
Yes. Communicating with plants. Many, never to be known to the outside world.
You know, there's a cynical reading of that where you might say, okay, he's talking about hallucinations. But there's a deeper critique in here about science, isn't there?
There is, a very sharp one. The text explicitly warns against modern science trying to reap pecuniary gain, money, from these ancient plants without understanding the context.
That's the pharmaceutical industry in a nutshell, right?
Yeah.
We found this root in the Amazon. Let's isolate the active ingredient, patent it, and sell it.
And Manuel is saying, you can't just take the chemical. You need the wisdom that comes with it. The shaman acts as an evolutionary to the modern age because he translates emotion into color and silence. He represents a way of knowing that isn't linear, that isn't data-driven, but is relational.
And then we have the warrior. But this isn't the Conan the Barbarian warrior we might picture.
No, not at all. Let's look at the red warrior. He's described as wearing a red shirt and pants and a Yoruba necklace with red and white beads.
Okay, for listeners who might not know, what is the significance of the red and white beads?
That is the symbol of Shango. In the Yoruba religion, Shango is the Orisha, the god of thunder, fire, and justice.
Justice.
Justice. Now think about Manuel. He's a judge. He sits on a bench. He holds a gavel, which is basically a hammer, right? A tool of thunder.
Oh, wow. I didn't even make that connection. The gavel as the thunder of Shango.
It fits perfectly. But here is the twist in the poem. The text says, the red warrior's greatest weapon was persuasion, not violence.
That is beautiful. The warrior who fights with words.
It's the ultimate synthesis of his two lives. When he was in court fighting for the Aspira decree, he used the Red Warrior. He was channeling Shango. He was using the fire of his intellect and the thunder of his voice to bring justice. He wasn't physically fighting, but the spirit of it was the same.
There's another figure, too, the wolf.
The figure wearing the wolf mask invoking Tlaloc.
And Tlaloc is Aztec, right?
Correct. The Aztec god of rain. So look at what he's doing here. He's mixing Yoro, which is West African, and Aztec, which is Mesoamerican traditions. He's blending the Taino influences of Puerto Rico. He is creating this kind of universal indigenous pantheon.
And what does the wolf do?
The wolf invokes Tlaloc to end a drought.
A drought. Again, metaphorically, are we really talking about rain?
I don't think so. I think we're talking about a drought of the soul, a drought of justice. The modern world is dry, it's sterile, it's data-driven. The evolutionary puts on the mask, dances, and calls down the rain to bring life back to the wasteland.
It's such a powerful image. The judge in his chambers taking off the black robe, and underneath he's wearing the beads of Shango and the mask of the wolf.
It changes how you see the legal system, doesn't it? It makes it feel much more ancient.
It really does. Now, I want to pivot to something that feels a bit more personal. We've talked about society and justice, but Manuel also writes a lot about love. Segment 4, The Evolutionary of Love. And I have to be honest, I laughed out loud when I read the poem, The Evolutionary of Marriage.
I had a feeling you'd bring this one up, the marriage of interests.
It's wild. He basically says, don't marry a person, marry your interests.
If you love swimming, marry swimming.
If you love homemade soup, marry the soup.
It sounds completely absurd on the surface.
It sounds like a recipe for a very lonely life. I mean, I love soup, but I don't think I want to wake up next to a bowl of minestrone for the rest of my life. That's a fair point. But let's dig a little deeper. What is he actually criticizing here? He writes that in this system, there is no infidelity.
Okay, right. The soup won't cheat on you. I get that.
There's more than that. The soup won't judge you. The soup won't have a bad day and take it out on you. The soup won't have different life goals than you. He's talking about unfiltered love.
So he's saying that human relationships are messy because they are transactional. I'll love you if you do this, or I'm disappointed because you didn't do that. Exactly. But your passion, whether it's art or justice or swimming or soup, is pure. It is a one-way flow of devotion that reflects back fulfillment. It's a philosophical provocation, he's asking. Can you find a happiness that isn't dependent on another person's validation?
It's the evolutionary taking control of their own happiness, superseding the illusion that I need a partner to be whole.
Right, but, and this is very important, he doesn't actually think human love is impossible. He just thinks we do it wrong. Because there is another poem about the black princess and prince that shows us the alternative.
Yes. This felt like the counter-argument to the soup.
In this narrative, you have a fiery black princess and an unflappable black prince with an eagle on his shoulder.
Yeah.
And they are hunting.
Guess what?
A wild boar.
Yeah.
It always comes back to the boar.
The symbol of the primal challenge. Now, in a modern romance, maybe they would fight over who killed it. Or maybe he would kill it to impress her. Or she would kill it to prove she doesn't need him.
But what happens in the poem? They both strike it. They're equals in skill. But then the prince generously gives the prize to her. And she, in turn, invites him to supper.
The text says, her arrow had struck 2 hearts that day.
It's a meeting of equals. It's grounded in mutual respect. She doesn't need him to survive. She can hunt for herself. He doesn't need to dominate her to feel like a man. It's a partnership of 2 evolutionaries.
That is a much better model than the soup, I have to say.
I agree. But maybe you need to learn to marry the soup, to be whole within yourself, before you can have that kind of relationship with a prince or princess.
Ah, that's the key. You have to be an evolutionary first. You can't be a data point looking for another data point to complete you.
Exactly.
Now, being an evolutionary doesn't sound easy. It sounds exhausting, actually. Fighting the system, decoding illusions, channeling gods. Segment 5 is about resilience. How do you keep going?
Manuel uses the metaphor of the storm, which, for a Puerto Rican poet, is a very, very loaded image.
The hurricane.
He writes about the doubters who whisper fear as the storm approaches. They say it's going to destroy everything.
And the evolutionary, what do?
The evolutionary tests that fear against reality. They find safety in the mountain caves. But the core insight is that nature takes down what is in its way to rebuild.
That is a hard pill to swallow when it's your house that's in the way.
It is. Of course it is. But he's talking about resilience on a macro scale. Systems crumble. Institutions fall. Even careers end. The evolutionary understands that destruction is part of the cycle of creation. If you cling to the structure, you get destroyed with it. If you hide in the cave, if you go to your inner sanctuary, you survive to rebuild.
There's also a physical aspect to this resilience. The poem Dancing on the Watchtower.
This is one of my favorites. You have this image of a man dancing barefoot on a watchtower near the sea.
And it contrasts with the immobility of modern desks and chairs.
We spend our lives sitting, locked in cubicles,
Shh.
staring at screens. Manuel calls this a kind of chain.
Chained to the cubicle. I think a lot of people can relate to that.
The evolutionary breaks the chain through movement, through dancing, connecting with the wind and the sun. It's almost a prescription. You cannot be a revolutionary spirit if your body is stagnant. You need to move to keep the channel open.
And finally, the ultimate resilience test. Death.
The poem, Shadows Rise to Persist.
It traces a life cycle. The shadow starts as a plaything for a child, then it runs with the wind for the adolescent, then it slows down for the adult.
And at the end, the shadow doesn't just fade into nothing. It flies with the spirit into eternity's blaze, relinquishing resistance.
Relinquishing resistance, that's the final evolution, isn't it?
It is. It's accepting that even life itself is a temporary form. The ultimate illusion is that we are somehow separate from that blaze. The evolutionary realizes that death is just the final step in the transformation.
It's a profound way to look at it. Okay, so we've covered the bio, the philosophy, the archetypes, the love, and the resilience. Now let's bring it all home. Segment 6, the Yali in the jungle.
This is the synthesis. How do we hold these two Manuels in our head at once?
There is a quote in the source material from a Dr. Daniel Ibarrondo, and he sums it up perfectly.
Yeah.
He calls Manuel the bridge.
The bridge between UCLA and the Ivy League.
But he's not talking about the University of California, Los Angeles.
No. He calls it the university at the corner of Lenox Avenue, the streets of Harlem.
I love that. The University of Lenox Avenue.
Ibarrondo explains that Manuel taught students how to understand the colonized nature of their education. He didn't just teach them law. He taught them to see why the law was written that way in the first place.
So he used his Ivy League access to arm the students from the University of Lenox Avenue?
Exactly. He went into the jungle of the Ivy League, he learned the secrets of the temple, and he brought them back to his people. He was the trickster figure, the red warrior in the courtroom.
And visually, the source material leaves us with this incredible contrast. You have the photos of the Yale Sterling Law Building.
Which is massive. It's Gothic, all stone. It looks like a fortress of tradition.
And right next to it, the source gives us this AI art of warriors in jungles, glowing with neon light.
It's the perfect representation of his soul. The stone building is the world he lived in. The jungle warrior is the world that lived in him.
There is one last poem that I think captures this longing. The Fruit Fairy Dream.
This is a beautiful little vignette. A woman is lugging her heavy suitcase up 5 flights of stairs in a walk-up city apartment.
We've all been there, tired, struggling, surrounded by concrete.
And she has a dream that she is a fruit fairy in Southeast Asia.
And when she wakes up, she doesn't just say, oh, that was weird.
No, she realizes the dream is an invitation. It's a call to return to the temple of her origin.
The text says her heart was filled with joy at the thought of returning.
Manuel is telling us that we are all that woman. We are all carrying heavy baggage up the stairs of modernity. We're all tired. But inside each of us, there is a fruit fairy, or a red warrior, or a wild boar, just waiting to be acknowledged.
So being an evolutionary isn't necessarily about quitting your job and moving to the jungle tomorrow. It's about acknowledging that the jungle is there inside you.
It's about knowing that the apartment building is just an illusion, and that you can leave the suitcase behind whenever you want.
So we started this deep dive with what felt like a paradox, the judge and the shaman. But I don't think it's a paradox anymore.
No, it's a methodology.
It's the only way to survive with your soul intact.
If Manuel had only been a shaman, he wouldn't have passed the Aspira consent decree. He wouldn't have had the power to change the law.
And if he had only been a lawyer,
He might have burned out. Or worse, he might have become one of the digital masters, hollow, data-driven, disconnected from his own spirit.
he needed both. The evolutionary bridges that gap. They use the wisdom of the ancient world to navigate and to change the modern world.
That is the lesson.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Evolutionaries by Manuel del Valle Colón, I want to leave our listeners with a challenge.
A provocation.
Yes. We talked about marrying your interests. We talked about hunting the wild boar. We talked about stripping away the trappings of the suit and tie.
So here is the question.
If you strip away your cubicle, your job title, your social media profile, your credit score, and your daily commute, What are you left with? What wild boar are you actually hunting?
What is the thing that drives you when all the data points are turned off?
Dig for that, find that, and when you find it, don't be afraid to put on the wolf mask, even if you have to wear a suit over it.
Because the world needs more evolutionaries.
Manuel did it. He went from the projects to the Supreme Court, and he kept his soul intact. Maybe we can too.
Thanks for listening to The Deep Dive.
The curious.
We'll see you next time.